Let's talk about something I like to call taper madness. You like to push yourself, you almost like to be tired, sore, fatigued. It's a really strange existence. It's just simply trying to maintain or improve your fitness whilst getting fresh. Are you putting in months of hard work just to screw everything up in the final moments? Well, it's not that uncommon for people to do this. The art of the taper, and we call it an art because it's as much art as it is science. So today I'm going to walk you through both the art and science of the taper and how you should be doing it. Welcome to the channel. I'm Boris Clark. I'm a sports scientist, coach and trainer. I've helped everyone taper, from amateurs looking to set a PB at their local Grand Fondo or fun ride, through to professionals who are competing at the Olympics. I'm also an elite cyclist myself, currently tapering for the Tour of Taiwan, followed by the Tour of Thailand, which starts this Sunday. And today is Wednesday. So we're in our last sort of high intensity session as part of this taper. So let me talk you through what I'm doing and how it goes. So we have 3 efforts today. First one's coming up. I'm going to crack on with it. Then I'll talk you through the key physical parts of the taper, what you're trying to do, what you want to avoid, and how you might vary it for your individual situation. But time to crack on with this first effort. 8 minutes, over threshold, low cadence, coming up. Let's go. There we go. 8 minutes down, 415 watts, lowish cadence. Biggest gear is 5411, so on the flat there, it's doing almost 50k an hour at one point, so the cadence wasn't super low at sometimes, but the intent was there. Let's catch my breath and I'll talk you through the first bit of a taper. So first things first, what actually is a taper and why are we doing it? It's just simply trying to maintain or improve your fitness whilst getting fresh. So it's really allowing you to express the fitness you've built up over the months and months of training you've been doing leading up to this point. So how are we going to do that? Well, the main thing we're going to do is reduce our training volume. But if we're going to reduce our training volume, then we're going to want to maintain the intensity where it's at. And this can reduce the total quantity of intensity, but you don't want to reduce the intensity. So if you're doing some hard efforts in preparation for your event, you're doing, for example, 3 or 4 by 8 minutes, something a session I'd typically do, you might want to do similar efforts, but today what I'm doing is an 8-minute effort, 5-minute effort, and a 3-minute effort. So I'm just reducing the volume a bit, keeping the power numbers, the intensity very similar, and just that will allow us to maintain that fitness while reducing the volume and getting a bit fresh. So how much should we decrease the training volume? Well, this is where people go wrong. They read a definition, they say, oh, it should be 50%, or it should be a step taper where you drop it down a certain amount over a period of 3 weeks or something like this. And honestly, there's no correct answer. It depends where you're coming from. Imagine you're a professional athlete, you're training 25, 30 hours a week, high volume even for a pro. You can reduce your training volume by 50%, you're still doing 15 hours a week, that's quite a bit. If you're an amateur training 7 or 8 hours a week, and you decide to taper and you reduce to 3 or 4 hours a week, that's a huge drop in volume, you're almost doing nothing, and you'll likely lose a lot of fitness. So it's really a balance. Where are you coming from? How tired are you going into this taper? Other things to consider are things like international travel. So for example, it's Wednesday, on Friday, I'm flying internationally to Taiwan for the race there. I won't be able to ride that day, the travel's going to knock me around a bit. So you've got to take things like that into consideration in building your week or weeks leading up to the race. Now if you're finding the advice and tips on this channel and this video useful, then why not consider joining the FTP Club? There's a link in the description below. It's a subscription service by my friends at North. They provide training articles, training sessions, Q&A with coaches. There's recipes to fuel your training. There's lots of training advice on there, consistently being added to. And it's all for about $2.50 New Zealand a week. Less than half a coffee a week gets you access to pro coaches, advice, articles, training sessions from them. There's a link in the description, go check it out. It's also important to consider the structure of your week. So for example with me, I do almost half my training on the weekends. So if I was to reduce my training volume by 50%, something like this, during the week while I'm training here, I'll be doing almost nothing. Then I'm basically traveling, race prepping or racing on this weekend. And I'd go from like a 18 to 20 hour week down to like a 5 or 6 hour week, which is not going to be ideal. So I'm basically keeping the volume as normal during this working week, and then And then the main volume reduction is going to come from essentially that travel day and race prep into the weekend. And I think the key word there when I was talking about intensity was maintain. A lot of people think, well, I'm doing less, so I need to go harder. And you might go harder because you're prepping into a race, maybe your race requires that, but you don't need to up the intensity. If that's not what is required for the event, you don't need to up the intensity. Just keep it the same, reduce the volume slightly. Now the final point here is to do with what you're tapering for. Now the taper for a one-day race, a Grand Fondo, something like this, is going to look a lot different than if you're tapering for a big tour. If you're trying to get fresh for a one-day race, you probably want to go in pretty fresh, pretty ready. But if you're tapering for a stage race or a week-long event, it's going to look quite a bit different. You might want to carry a bit more load into that. Or like I've had before, you're training for about let's say 5 weeks on the road doing racing, and your last chance to really get any specificity in is like this time here where you're actually able to train properly rather than just race to race. So in that case, you might want to really delay that taper, train that specificity right up until the last possible moment. Right, my rest period's almost over. I'm going to crack on with this next effort, 5 minutes, very similar power to the 8 minutes. Bit over threshold, it was about 415 watts, so hard, but not all out. Now this one's shorter, but it's not getting more intense. I'm just reducing the volume a bit. Let's go do it. Okay, 5 minutes, 425 watts, free cadence for that one, and same with the next one. Feeling pretty good, which is what we want to see. So, but if you're not feeling good, let's talk about something I like to call taper madness. So taper madness. Now, if you're an athlete, you're probably pretty process driven. You like to train and like feel this progression. You like to push yourself. You almost like to be tired, sore, fatigued. It's a really strange existence. So a taper can be quite confronting when all that starts to disappear, and you can actually start to feel quite tired despite freshening up. And the simplest way I can explain this is your body has all these natural painkillers when you're tired, you're sore, releases these things to kind of help get you through. As you ease up, you don't need those things anymore, they disappear. You can actually feel pretty average. So just trust that's a normal part of the process. And then reducing volume, reducing the amount of intensity can feel quite confronting too. You feel like you're no longer making progress. But this is all part of the process, you've just got to go through it. But that switch of training I'm going to do, how good I'm going to be, versus training I wish I'd done, is instant as you start that taper. And yeah, it's really hard to deal with. Now I'm happy with how I'm going, but of course I always wish I was going better. I'd like to be going better, have 50 watts more on my threshold before going to these races. Of course, I'm not the strongest rider there, so I wish I'd done more. But if you look back at your training and it all went really well and you basically simply could not have done more, you've just got to deal with it, just accept it and move on. So I'm going to crack on with my last effort of this session, and then I'll talk you through some nutrition stuff to do with tapering. Okay, the last one. This one will be a little bit harder, so aim for just a little bit harder with that 5 minutes again. Let's go. Woo. Simple as that, the session's done. 450 for that one. Feeling pretty good. So I get asked, what percentage of FTP are you doing these efforts at? And I will put that on screen. I don't think percentage of FTP is the best way to prescribe to individuals, but as a group, it works pretty well. For context, I'm going sort of towards, or just over 90% of my max heart rate by the end of each effort. So it's pretty hard, but I've got kind of 20 beats or so left in the tank if I was to go full gas, and the fact my heart rate is going that high relatively easily is a really good sign. Freshening up, a week ago I couldn't have done that because I was just under that training load, and just all part of the process. So nutrition during a taper. So a lot of people worry about body mass and things like that, and rightly so, it is an important part of cycling, particularly if your event's hilly. Now this is not the time to try and be losing body fat or weight. Being in a calorie deficit or being in an energy deficit is really stressful on the body, and that is not what you want when you're trying to freshen up. But you are reducing your training volume, of course. You're reducing the total intensity, or the total volume of intensity. You're reducing the total amount of work you're doing. So you are going to have to eat less in order to just stabilize things. But losing weight should not be the goal. Your goal should be to be in about energy balance. Not gaining weight, not losing weight, just holding steady. Now when I talk about weight, really I'm talking about fat. So there is a chance your weight goes up, and this will just be water, glycogen, things like this, which are going to be beneficial. or they're going to come off as soon as you start riding and actually using them. So don't be too worried if the scale does go up a little bit. Don't go excessive. You don't need a carb load days out, the day before, 2 days out maybe. So there's so much you can cover in a taper. It's so hard to individualize. It's so hard to give generic advice because it's so individual. Even your own taper is likely going to vary taper to taper because of where you're coming from. If you're going into a block really tired, you're going into a block feeling fresh or underdone, travel, not traveling, things like this, they're all going to change what you're doing a lot. But I hope that covers the basics of what to do. Hope it gives you some ideas. And of course, subscribe, like the video, and reach out if you've got any questions or further ideas you'd like covered.